Dr. Michael Adams, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I practice in Boca Raton, Florida. I trained conservatively at the University of Miami and Yale University School of Medicine. I served in the Army Reserve in the Medical Corps and been assistant professor of psychology at the University of Miami, also assistant professor at Nova University in Fort Lauderdale, and finally, primarily my private practice, and to this date, probably over 90,000 direct clinical patient hours. I was able to watch both of those interviews, Rich and Mark, and I found both of them to be very credible. And the reason I say that is starting with the first gentleman, Rich, a police officer, right? So he had practiced as a police officer for a long time, and through the course of his interview, at times he would talk about his experience as a police officer, being on the SWAT team, on patrol, also in the Marine Corps Reserve, and he would pepper his interview several times with that. And in my judgment, he did that to establish credibility. He wanted those who were listening to his interview to understand that he was a credible source. And I found through the course of that interview that indeed he was. He was telling his story as best he could in a very detailed fashion, and I thought that he was entirely credible. He also had an affect in my work. We call an affect your mood, if you will, your presentation and the content of what you're saying. Well, his affect truly matched what he was saying. And I found his story to be particularly credible because his first sighting was when he was driving on patrol. He wasn't in the woods. He wasn't looking for game or even for Sasquatch or Bigfoot. He wasn't looking for anything. He was on normal patrol, but he got a very, very good sighting. And as far as I'm concerned, watching that interview, I thought he was very credible. Mark, additionally, very credible. He was a machinist or is a machinist, and I found his story. He had been in the woods since being a young boy, a hunter, and he came across Bigfoot in a way that I also thought was very, very credible, because the way he told the story in so much detail, I left feeling like this is a man who truly experienced what he experienced. Both of them did, because again, they didn't overstate what happened. They presented as though these are the facts. So they didn't overstate what happened. So that's what made it even more credible for me. It was a statement of fact. This is what we saw, this is what we experienced. And so that, for me, as an observer, as a trained psychologist, I thought it matched the experience perfectly. Their narratives did. Both of these gentlemen had, or have, linear careers, one being a police officer, the other one a machinist. Now, when we think of those career paths, right, we think about people who are engaged in a pretty linear path. We do things a certain way, right? And yet both of them had a very nonlinear, out-of-the-box experience. So that also added credibility for me, because I view that in such terms as, okay, these guys were responding to something that they had not seen before, not experienced before, and could not fit it into a box. So it was a very out-of-the-box experience. They were really presented with something that they could not easily categorize. And human beings want to categorize things. They want to figure it out very quickly, identify it. And in those cases, is it friend or foe? And that's very visceral, it's very primary, right? So out in the woods, when they're experiencing this, they're thinking, what is this? Is this something that could hurt me? Is this something that's friendly? And that's very visceral. And that kicks in, by the way, before the cognitive function, because that's an important thing to remember. If we feel fearful, that's going to be the gold standard to begin with. How do I respond to this? Am I safe, not safe? And then there'll be a cognitive evaluation. There'll be the, oh my goodness, what was that? And there'll be the after-action report they used to call the military, where you digest what's happened, you think about what's happened, you try to categorize what's happened. And I think they both did a great job, frankly. Yes, what I was indexing in terms of those interviews is, again, coming back to the affect, does their presentation match the content of what they're saying? And that matched really well, right? And there also wasn't any, as far as I'm concerned, any hysteria in this. There wasn't any over-exaggeration of things. So I always index that with people. Are they, in my language we call it histrionic, are they adding a lot to the story to make it seem even bigger than it is? One thing I indexed is both of them stuck with the facts. And even when they had later experiences, they both really said, very honestly to the interviewers, right? No, after that experience, I didn't see anything for a couple of years in one case. I didn't see anything for a couple of years. That added more credibility for me, because they were looking for something. In some cases, didn't find it later on. Some cases they did, right? So I think that is something that I always index. How credible is the source? We all have psychological defenses. They allow us to go through the world and navigate our experiences, right? So everybody has them. Anybody who is normal interactions in the world has to have psychological defenses. They're neither good or bad, they just are. So when we talk about rationalization, that's where we take an event that's happened in our life and we just rationalize it. For example, we see something strange out in the woods and we go, no, it can't be that. It must be this. And they discard their original impression and rationalize it. I couldn't have seen what I just saw, right? So there's rationalization, and then there's suppression and repression. Suppression is a conscious act where I just saw something, I experienced something, but it's disturbing to me. So I am not going to talk to other people about it, and I'm not going to even maybe admit it much to myself. I don't want to relive what I just experienced. Repression, on the other hand, is an unconscious process where we push it so deeply down where we're not aware of it. We don't even think about it. So you may have a subset of people out there who've experienced Bigfoot, Sasquatch, if you will, who really don't remember the experience in some cases, or remember it and push it down. So there could be a subset of people out there, again, who have seen this, but you would never know about it because their defenses kicked in and protected them, because defenses always have a protective function. Okay, so there may be fear that enters the equation as well when we talk about suppression or repression. The fear can come from the fact that if I tell people about this, that somehow I might be ridiculed. I might have a position where I don't want coworkers to know about this. I certainly don't want my boss to know about this. I don't want an organization I'm working for to learn about this, because I don't want to be typed as a person who's unstable, crazy, if you will, right? So there's going to be different motivations for coming forward or not coming forward. And fear can be something that keeps you very much in check. Well, we all have different personalities that are formed through our developmental years, if you will, and life experiences, even gender, culture, obviously. All these factors come together to form a person's personality, right? So let's say just for example, right, you have an open-minded personality, if you will. Somebody who's open to different experiences, different cultures, different events, different anything. That person might be more amenable to an experience because they're like, anything's possible in this world. This just happened to me. It's full of awe for me, but it's something that I do accept. It just happened. I'll deal with it. I'll cope with it. I'll try to understand it. You'll have other people whose personality is such that they don't want to deal with anything that they're uncomfortable with, anything they can't categorize, anything they can't control. And those folks, we're going to have a more difficult time accepting what they've seen, because they're going to be those people who are like, again, I don't know where to put this. I have no idea where to put this. Another person, like I said, might say, this is interesting. I don't know what it is. Trying to work it out, figure it out. But it's really interesting. And as a matter of fact, in some of your interviews, some of the people think it's kind of cool. And a personality lends itself to that. A person is open-minded. A person looks at the world and say, this is a world of possibilities. We don't have all the answers, and it's very naive to think we do. An oversimplification, but we have memory, right? And memory could be short, intermediate, or long-term, if you will. Short-term memory is something that's not that important to you, right? Or important to that individual in the moment. So they may have something, let's say on a grocery list, right? Go pick up a bottle of wine and a carton of milk, right? Well, the person picking up the groceries is like, I could use some wine tonight. Forgets the milk. It never made it into short-term memory, right? Okay, so that's a quick and dirty example, but that's how that works. It never made it to short-term memory. Or it's unimportant, generally speaking. Things that you just don't remember from the day. 2 days later, you don't remember what you had for breakfast. Not that important. So we won't push that into longer-term memory. Longer-term memory are those things that have more, in my language, valence. They're more important to the individual, right? So that'll go into long-term memory. You interviewed a hypnotist, and the hypnotist said that what happens at night is we consolidate memory, what's important to us. We put our memories into deep storage. That's true for important events, things that matter to us, and those will go into longer-term memory. Now, everybody has memories of their childhood, memories of major events in their lives, but there's a lot of memories that are never accessed because they just haven't been that important, and we don't want to use our bandwidth, if you will, to remember those kind of things. Now, relative to your project, those events are so profound that your witnesses remember so many details because it's certainly made it into long-term memory. They'll probably be able to tell you the same story in 10 years with as much detail because it was that important to them. So that's an example of something that goes into long-term memory, something that's very important. I believe the hypnotist said this. He said that we're very visual beings, and we are. So if we see an event that is possibly even traumatic, but we see a profound event, what we're likely to do is take a still frame and a moving shot of that experience, and we're going to archive that in our brains. And it gets seared in the sense that it is permanent. It's a permanent image because it's so profound for us and it's so out of the box for us. So we put it in our minds, we park it there, and we will keep that seared, if you will, in our memories for the rest of our lives, especially if they're profound experiences. Okay, so with demand characteristics, it actually applies more to experimental psychology, but I'm going to be liberal with it. It's basically picking up on cues that are appropriate to the situation that you're in so that your behavior responds to those cues. Example, I'm being interviewed right now. I'm being interviewed by the interviewer. I have a camera on, I have a mic on. So the characteristics of the situation call for a certain behavior from me. That'll be very different an hour from now when I'm in a different context. Demand characteristics when you're out in the woods, right? Say, I'm out in the woods. I could hear an animal over here, this could happen over there, I don't know, but I've been out here many, many times before. So I know pretty much what to expect, right? What happens is when there's a Bigfoot encounter, those demand characteristics go out of the window. There's no context anymore. Yeah, I'm in the woods, but this does not fit my experience whatsoever. So the person really has no cues to go from. They may try to size it up real quick. Is that a bear? Because you've heard that many times. People who are naysayers will say, oh, it's a bear. Not really. Your interviewers saw something very other than a bear, right? So those demand characteristics that normally apply to them get thrown out the window. They don't know what to make of it. And that's what makes your interviewers more credible for me too. The more they say, I don't know what to make of it, the more credible they are because it actually doesn't fit in a box. If they said, you know, I saw this, I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure it was Sasquatch, but it could have been a bear. That's not the kind of people you're interviewing. You're interviewing people who are saying, no, I know what I saw. That was no bear. That was no other animal. They took the demand characteristics, threw them out the window, and they were willing to say, it could be something else. We're recycling this information in our brains. We're replaying the tape, if you will, because we're trying to see, can we sift through the sand and find something else? Is there something that I'm missing? Is there something that I will now remember by reliving this? The other thing we have to remember is that memory is associative. So it could be something that triggered that thought during the day. It could be something somebody said. Somebody could have said something about Bigfoot or something about the forest or something about hunting or something about a deer. It doesn't matter. If it's something that's associated with that event, it can trigger events in your brain so that you remember those experiences. Now with traumatic experiences, it's very common to have the experience of remembering it over and over again, very frequently in the beginning, certainly dreaming about it. And what happens is over time, hopefully, there's a decay of the traumatic part, the scary part, the part that you really find uncomfortable. And hopefully what falls away is the trauma part, and you remember it more as, oh my God, that was an interesting experience in my life. Sans fear, no fear anymore. That's really what the goal would be, right? I've had this amazing experience, but I'm not so afraid of it anymore. It doesn't freak me out anymore. Now it's more like, wow, that was really interesting. Why do you still have that experience of, oh my God, oh my God? Because you don't know. Because you don't know. While you're in the presence of that being, you don't know what its behavior is going to be because once again, you don't have context. For example, people with a bear, right, might say, hey, what you got to do is make noise, clap, whatever, make a lot of noise, and it'll probably run away. You don't know that about Bigfoot, do you? Because you don't no place to reference that. You may have heard, oh, Bigfoot's never harmed anybody before, but as you're there, you might be thinking, I don't know what's going to happen next. So far, it's not threatening, but that doesn't mean it couldn't turn on a dime. Maybe I look like lunch to them. You don't know that. Again, it's encountering a being that you've never encountered before, so you can't predict behavior. And that creates fear. People want to control outcomes, right? So this is a fearful event until it proves otherwise. And usually that happens after, remember I said before, you have a visceral reaction to something, right? Fear. Only later can you go, wow, that wasn't too bad. He didn't come after me or she come after me, whatever the case would be. So it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. But that's always after the fact. Fear comes first. Evaluation of fear comes second. I think some people take a strong position of denial with things they can't comprehend because they're not willing to open their mind. It sounds very simplistic, but that's the truth. People like to control their world or their perception of the world. So something that's outside the range of their perception or experience, some people will reject, and sometimes in a militant manner. And sometimes they'll degrade somebody or demean somebody who's had that experience. Now, in my biased judgment, how can you say that? You haven't had that experience, somebody else has had that experience. You can deny that if you want, but you're taking the wrong path because you haven't walked in their proverbial shoes, have you? You don't know what they've experienced, you don't know what they've seen, right? So to summarily get rid of that, reject that, and say it didn't take place, that denial has a lot to do with their own personalities, to come back to personality. It means that they have a lack of open-mindedness to see the world as a place of possibility. And I'll tell you what underlies the denial. Fear. Fear. They're fearful of something they can't identify, understand, or control. And that makes people very nervous and very fearful. So fear is a protective function, right? So when we're presented something that we perceive as fearful, we look at that stimulus, if you will, and we say to ourselves, what might happen to me or my loved ones, if you will? What might happen? And you evaluate that. And what ends up happening is that heightens your alert. So you've heard of fight or flight? Okay, so in the presence of something fearful, we think in two directions. We run or we fight. Those are really our two options. Except in modern society, we also sit still. And when we sit still, that creates a lot of stress because that's antithetical to our animal minds that say, I run or I fight. Modern day, we sit still, absorb the stress. Now, how does it affect us physiologically? All our hormones go crazy in the presence of fear, okay? So adrenaline gets pumping in, right? We start to feel as though we're at a heightened level of alertness. Our pulse might be going up, our blood pressure goes up. We're getting ready for battle, if you will. And that's a physiological response that's more in our animal brains. But fear serves a protective function. The unfortunate thing is sometimes fear is over-exaggerated. It's something that we don't need to be quite so fearful of. But again, that's a cognitive evaluation. That's a person thinking, maybe I'm overly fearful in this situation. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating the threat, if you will. So, but fear is a protective function. Because you have multiple sightings from different people, in some cases you've come across a few people who've seen the same phenomena, okay? But normally I think you've come across people who've singularly seen something. Is that correct? Okay, so the story there is that adds more credibility, I believe, to all those stories. Because if you have 10 people seeing the same phenomenon, you go, okay, everybody saw it, so it must be true. But you have an element sometimes of groupthink, social pressure that could enter into that, where it's like, yeah, I saw it, but I didn't quite see what you guys saw. But because they want to, it's called social comparison theory, you want to be in concert with your peers, you might tend to see something more robust that really wasn't there. So let's go back to, say, 10 people. Forget the group of 10 people. Now we got 10 individuals. Because you have different sightings under different circumstances, that actually makes the phenomena, in my judgment, more credible. Because you don't have any groupthink anymore. What you have is the phenomenon of this person saw it, that person saw it, this person saw it, and you weave all those together. Now you get some pretty robust evidence. And I want to address something else. People out there watching this might say, oh yeah, you know what, but there's a lot of people faking things. There's a guy out there in an ape suit, they're making fake. I don't care about those things. Let's say that makes up X number of cases that are bogus and hoaxes, if you will. It doesn't change the metrics of there are a lot of people who have seen it, a lot of credible people who have seen it. What do you do with that subgroup? Because that's really all that matters. Forget everybody else. Those are the people that matter, because that's where your real gold is. It's those experiences. We can forget about all those other people for the moment, because it doesn't matter in terms of what we're trying to find. Because there's always naysayers. There's always people who are going to say there's hoaxes. And there are some. Who's denying that? But we have to keep our eye on the ball. There's a lot more people out there who have very solid evidence. So the motivation behind hoaxers comes back to each individual's personality. Why would they want to do that? Are they looking for attention? Are they looking for a way to have a cheap thrill, if you will, right? Are they really so stuck in their worldview that they can't accept this possibility that they have to go out of their way to create a hoax, right, and create drama around something that truly is something that they don't know anything about, right? So they dismiss it, or they challenge it, or they create a hoax. But again, what's the purpose? I think the answer to that question is it comes down to each individual. What is their individual motivation? Why are they doing this? Are they doing this for attention? Again, is this part of their denial? Is this because they don't believe in it and don't want to believe in it, and they don't want anybody else to believe in it? Now think about that motivation. I'm going to show this hoax so that all you people out there understand that this is all a game, it's not real, it's a hoax, to undermine the credibility of other people, right? And their motivation is unfortunately counter to what's trying to be accomplished here. And for lack of a more fancy descriptor, not very nice people. In psychology, we have a concept known as one-trial learning, and you see it oftentimes with a traumatic event. It could be a positive event too. You have a positive experience and you feel good about it, or oftentimes it could be a traumatic event, right? So one-trial learning is you only have to have one experience to profoundly change the way you view something. So if we look at your folks who've been interviewed with an encounter, right, or some cases multiple encounters, it had such a profound experience that it shifted their worldview, the foundation of how they see things, right? But it's not like they saw it 30, 40 times. In some cases, they only saw it once. In some cases, they saw it a few times. But it was such a powerful experience, and we call it one-trial learning, that that's all it takes. Example, a child who puts his or her hand on the stove once, when it's hot, and the parent says, don't you do that, it's freaking hot, and they put their hand there, and it burns, they won't do it again. One-trial learning. Don't put your finger in the socket. It's not a good idea. One-trial learning. And we find this in life. And I think with respect to what you're investigating, I think one-trial learning, this is a robust example of that. I think that Bigfoot is a great example of something, once again, that people can't categorize. So who are the people out there who are saying, let's investigate this. Let's take a closer look at this. Let's see if there's some science behind it, some explanation behind it. If you're in the mainstream in terms of science, or a professional, if you will, you're taking a risk because you're willing to say, I'm going to pursue this, and I'm not going to really pay attention to the naysayers. I'm not going to be put down by them. And those people are truly pioneers. And that's been true throughout history, right? Whether it's religion, politics, medicine, science, whatever human endeavor, people take risks and chances. And one of the risks and chances they take is that people may think they're foolish. But that's throughout history, right? So people who are willing to say, yes, I'm going to get ridiculed for this, but I'm going for it anyway, those are truly pioneers. They're transformational people who are willing to say, let's take a shot at this. Let's see what's out there. And that's the kind of person that we should celebrate, not denigrate, because that's the person who's willing to say, okay, I don't even know the answer to all these things, but I'm willing to look at it. I'm willing to take a look at this. I'm willing to take that ridicule. I'm willing to take the naysayers, because there's something out there. These people that you've been interviewing, they're credible. They are credible people. They're not folks who are out in left field. Again, I've worked with 90,000 hours worth of people. I kind of know crazy, okay? None of the people that you've honored me with being able to take a look at their interviews, they're not crazy. They're people who are stable people who've seen something that they just can't understand and identify, but they're profoundly changed because of that, okay? So pioneers, once again, are people who are willing to push through the limits and the boundaries and try to see something from a different perspective. And they're brave. I do believe in the world of possibilities. I never tell somebody, oh, that couldn't happen. I never do, because how do I know? My life experience is like this. It's not like that, right? When an eyewitness comes forward and tells their story, I like to tell people this all the time, that there are no boring stories, only boring storytellers. Everybody needs to be a witness of another person's story. We all have stories to tell, our life stories, our experiences, our events. In something that's very profound and transformational, a person really feels, if they're brave enough to come out and say, I need you to witness my story. I need you to believe me. I need at least believe that I saw what I saw and I had this experience, because it becomes validating. People need to feel validated, like I'm not the only person out there who's had this experience. So I'm going to share it with you in the hopes of learning that there's other people like this as well, and people in the general audience who've never had an experience like this might open their minds. So in telling this story, they're hoping two things. One is to be cathartic to a degree, get it off their chest. And the second piece is to spread knowledge around other people, to say, there is something out there. There's something I've experienced. It's real, and you need to open your eyes to this. So when a person initially has an experience, what they're doing is evaluating that experience quickly, but that's visceral. Again, is this a threat to me? Is it something benign? Is it something friendly? I don't know. We're taking this in the context of Bigfoot out in the woods, if you will, right? So you size it up very quickly, but that sizing up is more sensory. In other words, you're viscerally experiencing it. You're feeling it almost in your body, okay? What is this? And so in the immediate experience, you're evaluating, is this something to be feared or not? Should I back off from it? Should I try to defend myself? What's going to happen next? Okay? I have to think that with some of the people who've had the encounter, they were relieved when it left the area because they didn't know what's going to happen. Maybe some of them wishes they had more of a glimpse, more of an experience with it, but some of them may have felt like, oh, wow, that was really scary, and they have some relief, okay? So first thing is a visceral response. They see it, they feel it, they experience it, they evaluate it afterwards, cognitively, something we do with our brains, try to categorize it, and then later on, we start thinking about it. What just happened? Now, they may hold on to that for a while without talking to anybody about it, or they may share it with a loved one or a friend. And some people may never share it. Some people may hold on to it forever. But what happens after that is more representative of their individual personalities as opposed to a general psychological process. So it depends on your personality. Are you a sharer? Are you a person who says, hey, I've got to tell my family and friends about this. I got to get this off my chest. You can't believe what just happened. Get right on their phone. Or are you constricted in the sense that you feel like, no, I can't share this. I can't talk to anybody about it. Possibly never. So that's what happens afterwards. You process it, you think about it, you decide, what am I going to do with it? Some of your people, I'm sure, started to investigate it much more deeply, right? So they got into it and thought, wow, this is tip of the iceberg. I want to learn more. I'm going back out in the woods. I'm going to try to see if I have an experience like this again, or get more data on it to answer it, to satisfy their curiosity. So everybody is different. One of your people did not want to go back in the woods again, certainly not alone. A hunter who really knew the woods and really enjoyed the woods. But he had one encounter that shook him up so much that his conclusion was, after thinking about it a lot, the only way I'll go out there is with somebody else. I'm never going out there again by myself. It really shook him up. So it depends on the person. It depends on how they respond to stress and how they respond to events they can't categorize. If a person such as Mark, who has been an avid hunter pretty much his whole life, starting as a child into his adulthood, if he's had a traumatic experience like he's had, or a fearful experience, and now he's afraid to go back in the woods, how can he deal with that? If he desires to go back in the woods and reestablish himself as somebody who could be out there and be okay, then actually with trauma, there really is a two-step process. One, giving the person a chance to evaluate for themselves, how did I experience that? How has it affected me? And second, do I want to re-experience something? Do I want to be able to go back into the woods? If the answer to that question is, yeah, I do want to be able to do that, then it's best to do that, as he has said he's going to do it, with somebody else. So he doesn't feel quite so vulnerable. But he feels like, I'm with somebody out there right now. And by the way, if I come across something, I got another set of eyes with me. Whoever you are, look at it too, because holy, you know what? I see it, you see it. So a buddy system, if you will. And that works. That works. People can become obsessive about something, especially in this world, if you will, if they seek more answers to their questions. Because with every experience, it actually creates more questions, right? Now that could be twofold. One is I'm obsessed with it because I want to find out more and more and more, or they unconsciously may want to verify their experience by finding more proof. Like, I really did see this, I really did that experience, and I'm going to find more and more proof. And I'm obsessed to find it because I want to find more evidence of this. So it validates my original perception. It's almost a validating process when people become obsessed, okay? Now, as to why would somebody be more hooked into Sasquatch than other paranormal phenomena or other mysterious events? Possibly because the Sasquatch kinda looks like us, kinda, in the sense that it's vertical, right? It's got 2 arms, 2 legs, right? Shoulders, head, right? Nobody's quite exactly sure how it looks all the time, but it's something that's not that similar to us. When you say, let's talk about aliens from other planets, we have fantasies about what they look like, but we don't have any hard evidence, not really in terms of what they look like, unless you go to Roswell. And you got to get a special pass for that, okay? But other than that, I think we're drawn to something that possibly could be similar to us, right? Does it have a social life, right? Are they intelligent? Well, apparently they are intelligent. They seem to be avoiding us. Why are they avoiding us? It creates a lot of questions, right? I'm sure that the fantasy is if we could somehow communicate with one of these beings, it would answer our questions. That's what we're looking for. How did you get here? How did this happen? What are you thinking about? How do your minds work? What are your social relationships like? You seem to be avoiding humans. That's been going on for a long time. How did that start, right? So questions can lead into obsessions because people want answers, and they'll take the deep dive and go further and further into something because they feel like if I do that, I might find the answers to my questions. When people have what we call emotional flexibility, what we're talking about is a person whose emotions are able to not stay within too fine constraints. They're able to adapt to a circumstance, if you will, and their emotions basically allow them to be open to experiences. A person who's too rigid in their worldview is crazy. That's what a person who's too rigid in their worldview is. They're crazy because they can only see the world through one finite lens. We call those people sometimes psychotic because they've lost touch with reality. They only see world in one simple finite way. Emotional well-being, mental health is strongly associated with flexibility, the ability to think outside the box, to experience different people, different events, different circumstances with not such a critical eye, but an open eye. Those are mentally healthy people. They're mentally healthy because they see things as possible, not rigidly, possible. For people out there who doubt and say science has never proved the existence of Sasquatch or Bigfoot, if you will, so there's no hard evidence that we can hang on to and say it's 100% foolproof, nobody can challenge this. To me, as an observer, I look at that and say, that doesn't mean anything to me in terms of perhaps it's not easy to get that kind of hard data. Maybe this is a very elusive being that is not so easily, if you will, assessed, evaluated, caught on either camera or in its element or what have you, right? I'm always drawn to science and how in 1938 there was an extinct, supposedly extinct prehistoric fish called a coelacanth. Coelacanth was supposed to be extinct 20 million years ago. They were sure. This has been extinct. It's prehistoric. Doesn't exist. Can't. Until they catch one off of South Africa in 1938. Now, prior to that catch, any scientist in the entire world would have said, that is an impossibility. Can't happen. Impossible. And yet it did. I think that's a great example from science of saying, keep your mind open. Keep your mind open because anything is possible out there. Recorded history goes back somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 years. It seems like a long time ago until we recognize that human beings in their modern form go back over 200,000 years. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but that tells me that there's an enormous amount of time in which modern person has been on the planet, and we don't have any recorded history of that. So it'd be kind of naive to think that during that entire span of time, not a whole bunch went on, except we hunted for animals and caught fish. We may have had civilizations that came and went. We may have had species that come and went. These beings might have been, you know what? We're going back to the hills because that's a better way of life. We don't know that. And yet it's a fascinating part of science history that deserves more investigation. How do we not know that these are really advanced beings who said, you know what? Going back into nature is not such a bad idea.